once was a place enchanting your darkest desires. There once was a road that crossed all your tranquility. A fight for true love, a fall for timeless lust, secrets of the labyrinth, destroyed bonds at the glance in a mirror. Hearts closed, thorns in prison, a spirit hardened. Rise up, warrior, confess your truth. Join us inside Black Garden. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Decree of Dominion podcast with your host, Dark Law. Have a special guest for us inside Black Garden for Black Garden episode 7, Miss Jessica Grout out of Washington area up in the northwest part of the United States. And so welcome again inside Black Garden. We'll be releasing September 2024. And so how are you doing, Jessica?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. How are you?
I'm doing well. And so can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Jessica Grout. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist and an interracial couples coach. My therapy practice is multiracial mental health, where I work with multiracial individuals, couples, families here in Washington. I'm also licensed in Oregon, so I work with some people there as well. A large chunk of my clientele is interracial couples. So I've also recently begun developing a group coaching program for interracial couples called Interconnected. It's in kind of the waitlist stage, but we're hoping to launch that in the coming months. And I think maybe also important to highlight just personally. So I work with interracial couples. I'm multiracial, so I came from an interracial couple. I'm in an interracial relationship and raising multiracial kiddos, so I'm really immersed in kind of the multiracial universe and experience, both professionally and personally. So, yeah.
Awesome. And so again, welcome Jessica to the Black Garden. And so buckle up, y'all. We're gonna interracial dating is a big topic in dating in today's society. And it's not just African American and Caucasian American, it's a multi different races and backgrounds, ethnicities, religious groups, etc. And so we're gonna, come at you with a lot of knowledge and wealth and great tips on navigating through that. And so welcome inside episode 7 of Black Garden, and stay tuned as we go through this wonderful topic today. And so Jessica, why don't you tell us, how you kind of got first started and interested in getting licensed to be a dating and relationship therapist?
Yeah, so I have always been kind of the person, even as a younger kiddo, that people just kind of gravitated towards to talk to about their problems. I remember being a TA in like 6th grade, and the teacher wanted to like sit down with me at lunch and talk about her problems, which not appropriate, but I think it's always just been kind of a calling for me in terms of connecting with people. I also was a military child, and so it was really cool. I've lived all over the world, so I've been able to really get to see different people, different stories, different backgrounds, and I've always just been really interested in it. So I studied psychology in undergrad, and then for grad school decided to try my hand at becoming a therapist. So yeah, I really really love the field, and it's something that feels like a really good fit just for my personality and how my brain works and what I want to do in the world.
Awesome, awesome. And so again, we commend you. Like I said, it's not a easy profession. You definitely have to have a caring heart and actually, have a desire to help others. And so definitely appreciate you stepping up and being a warrior in that arena. And so we're gonna get into it, y'all. Again, we're gonna talk about interracial um dating, relationships, etc. And so first question I have for you, what is the biggest misconception that you kind of see out there within interracial relationships, and have you taken the steps towards debunking that?
Ooh, so I think a couple of things come to mind. One, when I think about a misconception, maybe inside of the relationship, is that you can have an interracial relationship and not talk about race. I think sometimes people go into the relationships with that colorblindness, which I actually find incredibly harmful. And I think that people who maybe are in their first interracial relationship really learn quickly that that's a conversation that has to be happening. It doesn't have to be the central focus of your relationship and your life, but it's definitely something that has to be addressed. So I think when I'm dealing with couples in therapy or in kind of a more coaching sphere, that's a really important thing that we talk about. Is just that, like, you need to be having these conversations. Like, it race impacts your relationship, full stop. So, I think, yeah, those conversations and opening those up can be, really helpful in debunking them. And I think maybe in more of a general sense and just, like, society's view on interracial relationships, I think that, a lot of people think that they can't be successful, that maybe that there's too much of a difference in the important things that couples need to have a successful relationship, and that just simply isn't true. There's definitely lots of very successful relationships between people from different cultures. And I think a big piece of it is just like how you navigate the unique challenges that interracial relationships have.
Awesome. I'm glad you said that, because a lot of what obviously not only in my just personal dating life, but around society, if you will, we kind of have that culture shock of we're just different, right? We eat different, we cook different, you
Mhm.
know, family barbecues or family gatherings are different. The way we think, and but we always hear, the one thing I want to talk about first is, we always hear is like, you just wouldn't understand me, or you just wouldn't understand where I come from. And so let's break that down. How do you help interracial couples navigate that together?
Yeah. Oh, such a good question, because I hear that all the time. Pretty much every couple I work with, that's an interracial couple, there's some sense of, you just don't get it. You don't understand my experience. And I think one important piece of that is kind of naming that there are some things where that's true, right? Like, you are never going to be able to walk in the shoes of a person with such a different experience, but that doesn't then mean, okay, that's it, right? Like, you don't understand this experience, and so therefore we stop. We shouldn't be together. I think a huge piece of understanding, or I guess too, even of just successful relationships, is feeling understood, right? Like, in order for people to kind of have successful relationships, they have to feel like heard and seen. And so I think that one of the things that I work a ton on with people is just like, how do we do that? How do we take the fact that, like, okay, you were raised differently, you have different views on some of these things, or as maybe, for example, a white partner with like a person of color, right? Like, you have just different experiences in how you walk through this world, and your partner's never going to get to, like, fully fill that. But, like, how do we take that as kind of an objective baseline and build how within the relationship, right? Like, you can learn to understand each other. There's, I think, a piece of teaching which can be frustrating, I think, especially for people of color. They're pretty, again, if you're in relationship with, like, a white partner, they're asked a ton to educate, to be the person to explain, to be the representative. And I think sometimes that can kind of feel I don't know, it gets kind of old and can kind of feel hard. And so when it's in your relationship, sometimes you don't want to do that. But one thing I talk a ton about is like you still have to like get to know your partner and what they need and how they can show up for you and um work to understand each other. We don't just stop at you don't understand me. We work through it.
I'm glad you said that because I feel like within that, a lot of what you're saying is communication, right?
Yeah.
Um, it's like you can't just say, "Oh, you don't get it," and just shut down, right? You actually have to have that discussion. And in regards to just from my personal dating experiences, I feel like a lot of it is as we get there when it comes to explanation. Like you don't
Mhm.
want to like they call it like thought vomiting
Mhm.
on the your significant other. Like I gotta explain what to do at the barbecue. Hey, you gotta eat auntie's potato salad. You gotta
Yeah.
hey, when you go to the space table, you better know what you're doing. Don't you say you got five in a possible and you get blown out, you get skunked.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there's just different, and that's just more like the playful, like family oriented things.
Mhm.
But I feel like just with interracial dating, I feel like it's the seeking to understand when necessary. Um,
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I think that I definitely think that's an important piece, right? Like, that you're not gonna know all of the things, especially if, this is a newer relationship or you haven't been in an interracial relationship before, right? Like, you're not gonna know what you don't know until you get there, and so I love that piece that you're bringing in of just, like, you have to be able to have these conversations as things come up. So I do think that's important. Having the skills to do that's really important. And I think that so kind of research shows that the most happy and successful relationships are the ones who tend to have shared values, shared morals, right? And so I think that our culture plays into that. It plays into, what you value, what's important to you. Like there are some cultures that are a lot more family oriented than others or really, value, yeah, like that more collectivist piece. And so I think that as you're just learning each other as a couple, right? Like remove the interracial piece, you are learning what makes this person tick, what their values are, and I think then there's a piece of that that comes into play with these like dynamics about culture, that we can kind of talk about it through maybe a broader lens as well. So I think those broader conversations tend to happen maybe a little more in depth, a little bit more, not necessarily first date, but when what's your view on this and how do you feel about this, right? Like that's going to be influenced by your cultural background. But yeah, I think you got to be able to have those conversations as things come up because they will absolutely.
right. And then I also think, to your point, like you just said something like maybe not the first date. I think you have to kind of fill each other out just as a couple, not necessarily interracial.
Hmm.
And then, like you said, those important, like, hey, what are your political views? What are your religious views? How do you view family? How do you view holidays?
Yeah.
What would you do in this? I feel like that, again, like you said, you have to learn each other as a couple first. And then when you get more serious and really like thinking about spending the rest of your life or spending a long term relationship with this other significant other, then it's like, all right, I need to figure out their core life values since
Hmm.
this is somebody I'm serious about.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, and so what are some like weird stereotypes that you've heard that are you just think just like ridiculous?
Oh, it's a great question. You know what my mind went to? My mind went to, there's this, like, TikTok trend, I don't know if everybody's on TikTok, but where it's like, "I'm this, of course we da 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 da," right? So, I've seen a couple that are like, "I'm in an interracial relationship, of course we," and it'll be things like a black woman and a white man where she's just like, "Of course I'm, with him for his credit," like those kind of things I think are really funny. I'm trying to think of like maybe the most outrageous ones. I mean, I think that the thing with stereotypes, right, even though they are harmful and obviously we see in so many places that like they are not true for everyone. That's like the core of it. I think some of the things come from things that have happened, right? So things that my mind's going to more of a place of like harmful stereotypes as opposed to like crazy ones. But Yeah, I mean, I think, the ones I'm thinking of, I think there's some truth to too, right? Like the seasoning thing, right? Like, go in and
Gotta
have
use
it.
Lowry's. You
You're
gotta use
right,
Lowry's.
you gotta, and so, yeah, so I think that there's definitely some stereotypes that I think are just really play on the extremes of differences, and I think that people are a lot more similar than different, in a lot of things, especially if you find yourself in a place where you're in a committed romantic relationship, right? Like there maybe it's from those first second date conversations or what, but like you've gotten to a place already that there's enough similarities that you want to spend time together, that you want to kind of click. Like I think people with vastly different views and vastly different just like outlooks on life don't tend to kind of click like that. So I think the biggest thing is just this emphasis on differences when obviously they're important. That's part of what we're talking about. But I think, yeah, they're exacerbated in some stereotypes.
Okay, so I know you said harmful stereotypes. So kind of break down what are some of those that are like the red flags or like the absolute no-goes.
Yeah. So the ones that were coming to mind for me are things like oh my god, I can never say that word. Fetishizing people where there's this like maybe someone just wants to be with someone who is exotic, or to see what it's like to be with someone from another ethnicity. I think that those can be really harmful, largely because they minimize people to stereotypes, to attributes. We're not looking at these people as full complete humans with thoughts and feelings and aspirations. We're looking at them for these stereotypical things that we think might be fun to experience. So I think those are really harmful. I think I know I mentioned early on, trying to think, I don't know if this falls into stereotype, like the color blindness piece. I think that could be like this idea that like interracial relationships should be colorblind, right? Like why I think that's harmful goes back to that feeling heard and seen piece, right? Like when you if you're colorblind, if you don't see color, right, then you're really not seeing the person. You're not honoring their lived experiences. You're not taking into account what they deal with on a day-to-day basis. So I think it can be really harmful to have a focus in like we don't talk about color at all type of a thing. So um,
Yeah, I've always never understood like the I don't see color. And I think it kind of goes back to ignorance is bliss, right?
mhm,
It's like if you see a problem, it's like, oh well, it's just like if you put like if a woman puts on a shade of makeup she hates,
mhm,
and you're her significant other, and she's like, babe, what do you think about it? And you're just like, I don't, I like all makeup. And she's
mhm.
like, but I think this is hideous. But I mean, I like all makeup. Just
Yeah.
think how ridiculous that sounds. And that's again, and it's less serious than color or background. But again, you're essentially minimizing that person to, hey, your feelings don't matter, or your experiences are kind of like invisible, if you will.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, right back to those differences where if you are so a large portion of the couples I tend to work with have a person of color and a white partner. Obviously, like you were mentioning at the beginning, interracial relationships can look a ton of different ways. They can have, like someone who's Hispanic could maybe be with someone who's black, right? Like there's so many combinations of what makes up an interracial relationship. But so my mind tends to think about kind of that person of color, white partner dynamic. And I think, and maybe too, just because it's so stark compared to like two people of color have at least shared experiences in maybe like certain areas of oppression, certain things of, distance from proximity to whiteness, right? Like there's pieces of that are in play in their day-to-day experiences. But when we have someone who is with a white partner, they don't always have that. They have a certain level of privilege afforded to them that, their partner doesn't. So when you walk through the world like, "Oh, we're all the same," right? Which for most people, because we're egocentric beings, tends to be everyone has the same experience as me, right? Then it's just so diminishing for, having a partner of color because they do not walk through life like you. They do not have the same experience. They do not have the same level of privilege, right? When you walk in and you say, "Oh, hey, that person, I don't know, they gave me a dirty look." And they're like, "Ah, you're just sensitive or you're just, it's not that big a deal." Right? It's so minimizing for the experience that that person of color has. So, I think it's really essential that we're talking about those differences and at minimum acknowledging them.
Also, I'm glad you said that. You said something earlier about fetishes, and that kind of goes into that.
Mhm.
From like person of color dating, a, a Caucasian or white partner.
Mhm.
I always hear like I want to have mixed kids, right? I want to have
Mhm.
biracial children, or
Yep.
I heard, this certain aspect of the relationship intimacy is better with this certain race, or
Yeah.
ooh, this is what, and like you said, it's minimizing and downright kind of like disrespectful in a way because you're essentially only seeking out a person of color or a multiracial person for the experience
Mhm.
that you've ingrained in your mind. And
Yeah.
I always tell people, you are what you are what you seek what you speak, right?
Mm.
You seek what you speak, and if you're like, "Oh, I gotta get back," back then I was a big Megan Good, Alicia Keys. Like Alicia Keys, that
Okay.
was the like epicenter. Mariah Carey, Alicia Keys, it was like, ooh, light skin,
Mhm.
biracial, and you know, just coming from the other side too, everybody was like, Tyrese Gibson, or he's like, I gotta get a man of color because you know XYZ, and
Mhm.
um, how do you when you're counseling and therapeutic, how do you kind of debunk that, helping people that have that kind of unrealistic fetishized standard? How do you help them kind of come back to reality and understand what they're
Mhm.
help them seek what they really want?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a really important piece, right? Like that, kind of like you were mentioning that I think sometimes people will go into relationships with a lack of awareness that that's what they're doing, right? When they're like, "Oh, I'm just complimenting the beautiful mixed baby," or "Oh, you should feel happy that people, you know, believe this way about black men," or whatever the stereotype is. I think they don't see necessarily the harm in it, and so I think it can be really helpful, and it looks a little different if I'm working directly with a couple. I also work with, like, individuals, and I have had some of those things kinda come up in individual work, so I think it looks a little different like that, but, with couples, I think it's just really important to bring in the, like, societal narrative and highlight how that might be what's going on, and, um, I think as a therapist, I definitely tend to be really client-centered, like, I do not agree with therapists who are like, "You need to do this," right? Unless it's, like, safety related, I think that, it's their life, it's their relationship, they're gonna do what they're gonna do with it, I'm here to support and help you, but I do think part of what my job is highlighting the things that you don't see, and so sometimes I might, bring some things up, like societally, there's this thing, or, other couples that I've worked with have experienced this. Like, what's your experience with that? So I think a huge piece is just like educating that what you're doing and you think is beneficial or you think is positive might actually be harmful, might actually be perpetuating a stereotype that maybe makes your partner uncomfortable or kind of plays into some negative interactions you have with their family, right? Like, so I think it's really important to look at the bigger system of things and then bring it down into the relationship. How does this impact you? And when you work with couples, it's really helpful because in the room, I can check in, like, so with the person of color, with whoever we're talking about who might be impacted. Is that your experience? Like, how is that when you hear your partner say, like, "Oh, I just only want mixed kids," like what comes up for you? And I think that once there's that education, when there's a real relationship connected on a human level, people usually are able to come back and be like, "Oh, that's not actually what I was trying to do," and, like, then we could work towards repair.
Also, and you said a lot about you said one word that I'll get to here in a second, but
Mhm,
you said a lot about awareness, right? Having that.
mhm,
A lot of times when we say something, I'm one of those people that you know, some I don't know if everybody resonates with this, but sometimes I say stuff and it just comes out right, or
Yeah.
it doesn't really have like that filter, or a lot of stuff is what I call confirmation bias.
Mhm.
Everybody has their own perspective, so and it's also tone of voice, and so in your head, I might say, you know, that's a nice shirt. And you might think I'm being sarcastic, like it's the ugliest thing. I
Mhm.
woke up late this morning. This is not even clean. I just reached in the hamper, threw on a shirt, and got in the car. What is this
Mhm.
guy talking about? And then, your significant other or your mom might say, "Yeah, that's a nice shirt." You might be like, "Oh my God, thank you. It's really, I just bought this at Ross the other day. And it was on clearance." And
Yeah.
so that's just one example of, you know, like, for example, the mixed kids thing you brought up, if you say it back to yourself, you're like, that sounds really ridiculous.
Mhm.
But at the time, it's like, I'm just speaking my mind, but a lot of times it's the lack of awareness when it comes to speaking your mind. And also and it's not just lack of awareness for what you said, but also the lack of awareness for your significant other's feelings as well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you're speaking to something that's really important is this whole idea of intent versus impact, right? Where I think we talk a ton about this in therapy with couples where yeah, exactly what you said. You might be intending one thing with what you're saying or not thoughtful about what you're saying, but it has an impact. And so I remember in grad school they're reading about this and there being an example used. I don't remember who wrote it, but they were talking about how, if I accidentally step on your foot and I break it, right? Like I didn't mean to do that, but we still have to attend to the break now. We still have to attend to the impact that it had on you. And it's really important that we are prioritizing that as opposed to prioritizing, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do that. Um, you're in pain and we needed to get you to the doctor kind of a thing. And so I think a lot of times just in interactions, but I think especially in our closest relationships, there's a lot that we're gonna mess up. We're gonna do something. We're gonna have a certain intention and it's gonna impact differently. But I think it's really important that we're attending to what that impact is, even if that wasn't our intention.
Right. And then another thing too, like you're saying about the broken foot, is the awareness to addressing
Mm,
the impact, right? The
yeah.
result.
Mhm.
So it's not just, "Oh my god, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I was trying to rush. I spilled my coffee. I thought I could save it. I backed up." You
Mm,
know, we get that you're sorry, we get all that, but hey, like you said, address, why I feel this way. And I think that lacks in a lot of relationships today of, hey, it's not that you said sorry for what you said. It's you never addressed how I was feeling, and
mhm,
um, you know, allow me to seek, because a lot of times when with our significant others, we're seeking to understand
mhm.
why they made us feel that way, but we're just met with, me personally, I just hate the word I'm sorry. It's more of like my personal just
Yeah.
childhood
Mhm.
with my fathers.
Yeah.
But so I've just always just been growing up, my dad used to always say, son, some people are just sorry. And
Mm.
I never knew what that meant until I was like 21 years old. And then I understood it's like, um, and I want to talk to the viewers real quick. Don't go through your life always being sorry. Be solution oriented. Don't just be sorry, be solution oriented. And don't think, oh, I'm sorry for the what I did. Think, okay, how can I address what has been done?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's really important, right? Like it's about repair too, right? Like sorry only goes so far, and when it's repeated, it's something that becomes a bigger problem. So it's actually with my kids, I we tend to when we work around sorries, we tend to prioritize instead of when you say sorry, you go, "Oh, that's okay." Right? Like I'll check in with my kids and like, "Is it okay?" Like sometimes there are some things that people apologize for that you're like, "You know what? No big deal. It's okay." But if it's not, we don't need to say that. Like we can focus on like I appreciate your apology or, like thank you for trying to make amends, right? But like we don't have to jump in to say like that's okay. And so I think yeah, when we're talking about like relationships, right? It's this piece of like how are we not stuck in this cycle of like doing something, I'm sorry, doing something, I'm sorry, right? Like how are we moving? And I think awareness is a huge piece of that. And I think like intentionality, right? Which I know kind of goes hand in hand with awareness, but it's like, okay, if I know last time I was stumbling around, I broke your foot, right? Maybe I need to just be more mindful about where I'm stumbling or like how I'm doing that, you know? And so I think when it comes to relationships, there's a piece of that that you can get from your partner, right? Like, that was not my intention. I like can we talk through a way that the next time maybe I need to say something I can say it in a way that you hear it, right? Where it doesn't lean into this. Like it reminds me of like microaggressions, right? Like there's so many things where they're like, well, I just said da 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 da, right? And I think that it's about that impact. So like how do you kind of navigate your relationship and your communication with the person that you at least like, if it's a new relationship, and love maybe if it's a longer relationship, how do you kind of navigate not continuing to do that? And I think a big piece is checking in with them and really hearing them, because a lot of times we tell people what we need. We a lot of times we might highlight, like, hey, I really need this to look like this, and the other person just doesn't hear it. So yeah, I think that's a really important point.
I'm glad, like, I like what you said at the end there. It's listening to understand, not listening to speak. I
Mm,
think a lot of time, like going back to what you said with your children, we just automatically, it's like a auto filter, right? Or auto correct, like, oh, it's okay.
yeah.
Oh, it's okay. I'm
Mhm.
sorry. It's like both of them interchangeably are just like auto, like when you're typing on your phone, it's like the auto correct to the text, like
Yeah.
predictive text. Like, oh,
Yep.
you did something, I'm sorry. Yep, no good, we're good. It's fine.
Mhm.
I'll just shut down next
Yeah.
week and cry in the car. It's fine.
Yeah.
Everything's fine. And
Oh, no.
it's always that reminds me of that meme where it's like the little cartoon character sitting in the fire and he's like, it's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
And
Everything's
so
okay. Yeah.
right. And so you're definitely want to, make sure you're being attentive to hearing your significant other and actually listening, not to actually hear them and understand and navigate that instead of just trying to respond. And
Yeah.
so there's a word you said earlier that I kind of want to get into, especially when it comes to interracial dating, and that's family.
Mhm.
Family, I think, especially in the people of color community,
Mhm.
um, that's like we always say, "What you bringing the white woman home for?"
Mhm.
Uh, but she white, or who you date? Who is that?
Mhm.
And so that's just some of the stuff. And like you said, who coming to the barbecue? And oh,
Mhm.
you with a white woman. And somebody said something that was on a YouTube video. There's there a rant about Kamala Harris for some reason. I don't really get into politics, but
Mhm.
they said something and it kind of leads right into your niche with the interracial dating. He said two things. He said, one, all people of color don't treat each other the same. And they said, other thing he said is most people in the community, when you date a Caucasian or white person, you kind of get disowned by the
Mhm.
community. And so I kind of want to break down, the family significance and influence it has on a person of color's mindset when they go into an interracial relationship.
Whew, you're opening a big box topic. There's, I think, so much nuance in there, such an important piece. But yeah, I think you're right. Like when there's a person of color dating a white person, sometimes on both sides, right? Like there's pushback from family around like what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Like why are you going outside of your race, And I think I think it's super nuanced in terms of like the history and of our country, right? And I know it might look a little different in different countries, but I think there's just been a history of white supremacy, right? Of how privilege is created and maintained. And I think that the outcomes of that have created these on the sides of people of color, created these just like protective like strategies, right? Where we tend um to kind of connect with other people of color, and there can be this like othering, again, both sides of it, where it's just like it's us against them type of a thing. And I think on kind of the white side of things, there has just been such a long history of disparaging people of color, for so many reasons, but I mean, I think it ultimately comes down again to maintaining power and privilege, that there is just this like there can be this like negative view of what it means to be a person of color, what it means to interact with a person of color. And so I think that especially on, I know we're talking about like the family of the person of color in an interracial relationship dynamic. um I think it really comes from this just like place of protection and place of also wanting to feel valued, where if it's like, oh, you need, it's like was in that Gold Digger song where he's like, when he made some money, got himself a white girl, I think there is this like narrative that success is again proximity to whiteness. So the more successful you are, the better off you're doing, right? Like you want to kind of enhance that by getting close to whiteness. And I think that communities of color feel offended by that. Like rightly so, and so I think again there's this piece around awareness and conversations to navigate that, where the initial response might be like, hey, what you doing, like why are you dating that white girl, or like what's going on, but I think that educating our families in just kind of what we need, what's important to us in our relationships, like why we're in this relationship can be big. And honestly, the biggest thing with that is boundaries. Is boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. I think where it's like, there might be pieces within your family where they don't like the person that you're dating, and whatever you're gonna say isn't necessarily gonna change that. And again, I think it's important for the person in the relationship to identify that that's not coming from like a place of malice. It tends to come from like they want you to be okay, they want their family to be okay, and it's scary to do that. But I think that, what was I saying? Oh, boundaries. I think that holding boundaries around like what you're willing to navigate with your family and your partner's family becomes really important to the success of your relationship.
Right, right. I'm glad you said that because from both sides, like from the white side, it's always like keep the bloodline pure. Or, they're very like you said, that privilege type thing. It's like, hey, a lot of theirs is like XYZ, go to college, do the boom, boom, boom. We already got the job, like,
Mhm.
follow the course, right?
Mhm.
Whereas our family doesn't know I've heard a lot just in the people of color community from my side is, well, there's a black woman out there for you. So why don't you just, stick inside your, race, or
And
um, why go outside your race when there's, someone inside your race for you? And so, what's your like opinion and take on like navigating through that?
I think there's a long history that brought us to the place that that's a narrative, right? Where I mean, I don't know if we have the time to go into all the details of like, the influence of Jim Crow and all of that on the black family, and like the removal of the black man from the household and how that impacted like dating prospects and things like that. Um, I think, there's a lot of information about that if people want to look a little more into it. But I think that at the end of the day, there's a piece in relationships, which I know was a little bit more of the messaging around like LGBTQ rights and stuff, for this whole thing of just like you love who you love, you connect with who you connect with. And I think that that sometimes it's not necessarily going to be the person you think you're going to end up with. But I think on the other side too, I understand that, like, again, if we go back to this idea of successful relationships sharing values, right? The people that you are maybe as like a default going to share some values with more likely are going to be, people from similar cultural backgrounds, right? Like I've worked with people who have kind of highlighted that they really either previously or I guess I'm in my mind I'm mixing some couples and individual work, but where they intentionally do not want to date outside of their race, or previously did not want to date outside of the race because they didn't want to have to like explain everything. They didn't want to they wanted the person to the author of post traumatic slave syndrome, she says something to the effect of like you want them to walk in at a 400 level, right? Like, so there's this piece that you don't have to explain that. I think is why too people seek me out for therapy. Like, the main people I work with are Black women, multiracial individuals, right? Because there's certain things that just my lived experience match with their lived experience. Like, they don't have to explain to me. I've had clients say, like, see, that's why I need a Black therapist, because like a white therapist wouldn't have understood that, you know? And I think that comes into relationships and families and things like that. So I get the idea of I don't want to have to do all of this hard work, because honestly, being in an interracial relationship is extra work. There are nuanced things that people who date individuals of their same racial and ethnic background don't the conversations they don't necessarily have to have that interracial couples do. So um so I mean, I get it. You know, I get it. And I think there's a piece where we still have to make space for people and what they need and who they love. And that those things don't always match up.
Also, I'm glad you said that because, again, it's all about, a certain comfort level, right?
Mhm.
A certain expectation of, what you expect in a relationship. And it's not, yes, it's about interrelational dating, but it's simple stuff too. Like, for example, like, financials.
Mhm.
It'd be nice to, if you're a big financial OCD person, it'd be beneficial for you to find a significant other that is good with money as well. That way you don't have to explain what credit is or, you know,
Mhm.
and again, a lot of people get drained having to over explain what they're good at and trying to fill a void, if you will.
Mhm.
And so with that being said, what are some tips that you would give interracial couples when you're working with them on being successful
Yeah.
in the relationship?
Yeah. So, I think I'll revisit the first one because I think it's just really big that I think like you have to have these conversations. Like you cannot go into relationships, interracial relationships, and just be like, we don't have to talk about race. It'll be fine, right? Like it might be for a little bit, but I think you have to have those conversations. And I think so. I have actually a toolkit that I created for interracial. It's called the Interracial Couples Communication Toolkit, and it's free. It's definitely something that if it's helpful to provide for your listeners, I can give you the link for that. Also, I guess it's at jessicagrout.com/toolkit, and I go into a few of these things that I'll kind of highlight here, but just different ways to communicate when you have to take on that additional unique layer of being an interracial relationship. And the other thing I'm thinking too, so I think the three things that successful interracial relationships do are one, they put their partner's feelings of emotional safety above the opinions of other people in their life. So again, how you navigate that, I think, is a lot more nuanced than just that statement. But I think that you I've had clients who they prioritize, "Oh, well, mom might be offended if I do that," over the emotional safety of their person of color, partner, and that will never work well. So they do that. They make it safe to discuss these uncomfortable things, right? Like to have these conversations. I think that's a really important piece. People don't want to have these conversations because they feel scary, because maybe they've observed even subconsciously some things that their partner and their families have done that make them think that it's not necessarily going to be a safe conversation. So really intentionally creating that safe space. And then I think the third thing is that they really have a clear picture as to what they will and won't accept, both from themselves, like in relationship with their partner, but also as a relationship and the external world, right? So really they understand the boundaries they have with their partner and understand that the boundaries that the couple has with the rest of the world, and they're on the same page with that. So I think those things are really important in terms of just maintaining a healthy interracial relationship. And then I guess a thing I'll pull from what you said, because it's actually in my toolkit, is this idea of uh listening from a place of curiosity to understand. I think so frequently, so much of the work I do with couples is just getting them out of this, like, we're in our different corner space and you don't understand me. Well, you don't understand me. Right. And so I think when we can lean into our partners and their experience from a place of curiosity and wanting to understand and valuing what they're saying, right? You can have these hard conversations. You can dive into things. They can feel safe because you don't feel judged and dismissed as you're talking to your partner about these things. So,
Awesome, awesome. Those are definitely some great tips. Um, a lot of, again, just on awareness and communication, like what we've been saying and speaking throughout the entire episode.
mhm.
I hope you guys are gleaning something and finding something that resonates with you. Like I said, whether you're in a interracial relationship, whether you're still seeking it interracial relationship, I hope you can take something as we go through these different tips and topics to add value to your daily life and become the best version of yourself and decree the dominion of your own mind. Right. On that note, um, what would you give somebody, or I know you say you work with individuals as well, how do you help someone, find that potential interracial relationship?
I mean, I think that just any individual going into a relationship they want to be happy and healthy really has to kind of understand who they are, what they value, and what they want out of a partner, no matter, I guess, kind of who's on the other end of that. And so a lot of things that when I do work with people individually, in terms of dating and just relationships in general, it's really just about getting that clarity for themselves, because I think a lot of times we just dive into relationships. We don't necessarily know what we want. We might know what we don't want, right? But we don't necessarily know what we want. We don't have good boundaries established, and we kind of just might go with the flow, or we might just, hey, this is good enough, or I don't want to be alone, or even people who've been in relationships for a while is like, oh, well, I don't really want, we've been together so long, and so I think being able to have that clear picture about who you are, what you want, what you need, um, and just being in alignment with your own values, I think will really help you kind of identify who would be a good partner for you, whether, it's interracial or, someone else. But just knowing that, I think, really sets you up for success.
Awesome, awesome. And so I hope you guys are listening and tuning in. What she's saying, she's giving you a small blueprint on helping you, find success in your interracial relationship. And so on that, I know we talked a lot about the positives and some of the things to do to maintain a successful interracial relationship. What are some of those red flags and some of the negative things you've seen in your therapeutic experiences that uh, people should watch out for as they're navigating?
Ooh, good question. Yeah, I think there's a piece of the inability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And I think that there's a range of that, right? Like ranging from like narcissism to just having a hard time getting out of our own perspective. And so I think that if you are noticing that your partner just, I wouldn't even say has a hard time, but is unwilling. I think there's a big difference, because sometimes we just don't have the skills for things. Sometimes we haven't experienced stuff, or we haven't been raised in a home that showed good, communication strategies. But I think when there's an unwillingness to understand that there's other perspectives, I think that can be a pretty big red flag, because that's really hard. It's really hard to do work, right? If you, it is okay to not know. It is okay to need to learn to build those skills and to like get a better understanding of each other, right? Like that's just a part of relationships. But the unwillingness to work, I think, is something that even in therapy, like I can't do anything with. If you're gonna come in and not do anything, and you're not gonna change, and you're just gonna be really firm in your position that you are right all the time, I can't help you. So I think that there's that's probably the biggest red flag.
I'm glad you said that because it goes with the whole theme of the Black Garden, right? And again, I just appreciate everyone, jumping in the Black Garden with us. And that is, it all ends and begins in you, right? again, it all ends and begins with you. Everything spoken through this episode, through the whole series, nothing changes. If nothing changes, nothing changes.
Mhm.
Like I said, you could go to see Jessica, you could move to Oregon or Washington and pack your bags today and drive up to meet with Jessica in the morning. But if you're not willing to change, nothing's going to change. You
Mhm.
can meet with God Himself. If you go to God or whoever you religiously believe or whatever creator you believe in, and you say, "Hey, I want this in my life, and I want this success," and they say, "All right," and the rule is, "Hey, you got to change this, this, and this," and you're like, "Nope, not changing a thing." Nothing's going to change.
Mhm.
And so you have to be willing and able to listen, not to respond, but for your significant other to be heard. You have to have the ability to care. Again, a lot of people, and I want to encourage the viewers to show yourself grace. Again, there's different skill sets. Everybody in the world, we're all human, we're all still developing. Not everybody doesn't have the whole everything checkmate. Everybody doesn't have everything all put together. But as long as we're willing and able to progress and be better, then on a daily basis, you have to show yourself the most optimal grace with that. And so, um, with that being said, what are some last minute tips that you would give anybody in their relationships and just some things to help them along their journey? And then can you also tell them where they could find your therapeutic resources?
Yeah. So, beyond some of the things I've already mentioned, I think maybe important to say that, tip wise, that like this is hard. Relationships are hard. Dealing with race is hard. Dealing with all the systemic stuff that we've talked about in this country is hard. And so I love what you were just saying about giving yourself grace. I think that's really important. But also I think it's okay to identify when you need some additional support, right? Like it is hard to come out of our own perspectives, our own experiences, fully. And so that's why therapy's there, And so I think being open and willing to do the work might come to a place where you just need a little bit of extra support from someone who's outside of you and your partner, outside of your perspectives, to help support you through figuring this stuff out because it's hard. And so yeah, if in terms of where to find me, so if you are located in Washington or Oregon and want to seek out my therapy services, my website is multiracialmentalhealthnorthwest.com. The toolkit that I mentioned, the interracial relationship or interracial couples communication toolkit that I created, is at my website, jessicagrout.com/toolkit. And if you want to find me on socials, I'm really mainly on Instagram and TikTok. But my social handle on both of those is multiracial mentor. So yeah, come find me, come chat.
Awesome, awesome. And again, all those links and handles will be in the description of the episode. So you don't have to worry about trying to hurry up and type as you're listening. And so with that being said, pleasure having Jessica inside the Black Guarding and taking all of us on this wonderful journey inside. Again, for all those already in racial relationships, I speak nothing but positivity and prosperity throughout your journey. Again, be wary of the opinions of others. It all ends and begins in you. And help each other become the best version of yourselves and help yourself to create the domain of your own mind. And for those of you that follow the Winner Circle, make sure you follow, like, and subscribe to Blemish Beauty Podcast, the Verbal Tea Podcast, Successful Toy Podcast, Breaking the Silence Podcast, Real Talk Monday, as well as Mahogany Speaks. It's been a pleasure being with y'all. Until next time, inside the Black Garden, this has been your host, Darklaw, and Jessica Grout out of the northwest part of the world in beautiful Washington State as well as Oregon. And so tune in, go ahead and follow her handles and show her some support for being a wonderful therapist in that area. And so it's been a pleasure. Until next time, thank you for tuning in to Decree of Dominion Inside Black Garden, episode 7. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Decree of Dominion podcast with your host, Darklaw. Be sure to follow and like on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon, and go ahead and follow our Facebook and Instagram pages as well. We hope that you took something and resonated with it, that you can apply it to your daily life to become the best version of yourself and decree the dominion of your mind. Remember, decree and declare and take back your rightful throne and your rightful place into the best version of yourself. Thank you.